Good evening. I am calling to order the meeting of the City of Salem Budget Committee for May 9th, 2018. Would the recorder please call the roll?
Mayor Bennett.
Here.
Member Kaser.
Present.
Member Anderson.
Likewise.
Member Nanke.
Here.
Member McCoy.
Here.
Member Osick. Absent. Member Hoy.
Here.
Member Cook. Absent. Member Lewis.
Here.
Member Nordyke.
Here.
Member Tigan.
Here.
Member Mingo. Absent. Member Moore Green.
Present.
Member Bassett.
Here.
Member Judy.
Here.
Member Hazlitt.
Here.
Member Bergman. Absent. Member Milton.
Here.
Thank you. Will you please stand with me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we move on to public testimony this evening, I'd like to ask if anyone on the committee objects to a slight reordering of the agenda this evening. The printed agenda, which is on your desk or in your notebooks, displays the second presentation this evening to be provided by Deputy City Manager Duncan, reordered from item number 7D to item number 7B. Staff have recommended this change as the information to be presented will be useful for the committee to have in advance of the discussion under item 7B.
So
Thank you. So moved by moved by Member Bennett, second by Member Nanke. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any discussion? Okay. Motion passes. Thank you. Okay, we're going to move on to public testimony now, and
There's no one signed up.
we do have one.
No.
No.
No one signed up.
Oh. No one? Okay, well, moving right along, let's, is there anybody who didn't have an opportunity to sign up that would like to address the committee? Okay, all right. All right, so let's go ahead and move on to item number 3, the minutes from the May 2nd meeting. May I have a motion to approve the minutes?
I have a correction.
Yes, Member Hazlitt?
Microphone, Clark.
On members absent, you did not put in there Milton or Judy Joyce.
Great, okay, thank you. Any other? Thank you, Joyce. Joyce. Thank you, Joyce. You can't lose saying your name. You know that, don't you? It's beautiful either way. Okay. Any other additions or corrections to the minutes from our last meeting? Okay, seeing none, may I have a motion?
As amended.
Second.
I have a motion from Member Nanke and a second from Member McCoy. Is there any discussion? All those in favor of accepting the May 2nd, 2018 Budget Committee meeting minutes as amended, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed signify by saying no. The motion passes. I'd now like to ask Budget Officer Jacobs to review the action items and handout materials, including the additions to our agenda items.
Thank you, Chair Moore Green, and good evening, Budget Committee members. Before I review the handout materials this evening, I would like to acknowledge a few folks, as this will be the final meeting of the Budget Committee related to the proposed fiscal year 2019 budget. I noted my excellent team members at the first meeting, but I would also like to acknowledge our budget counterparts in city departments. A few are in attendance this evening: Alicia Blaylock, Linda Weber, Renee Frazier, Rachel Hotstetler, Tiffany Corbett, Linda Weber, I beg your pardon, I repeated that. Samantha Naluai, David Lacey, Chris Snyder, and Ruth Stellmarker. Their exemplary work is essential in every aspect of city budget development and management. I would also like to acknowledge the contributions of the city's document services staff, and especially Josh Horrocks. I've worked with Josh for many years producing the city's budget documents, and often that has included significant 11th hour and 59th minute changes to the publication. I am actually sufficiently self-aware to know how annoying I can be in that circumstance, and Josh has always accepted every challenge with great patience and produced a superior on-time product for us. So on to handout items. Item 4A is errata sheet 6, and it recommends an increase to the general fund working capital for fiscal year 2019, as well as an increase to fund revenues. The increase to working capital, a total of $950,120, represents reforecasting fiscal year 2018 year-end expenditures for all departments in the general fund, which resulted in a $744,220 increase in anticipated savings. It also represents reforecasting fiscal year 2018 year-end revenues. The revenue analysis resulted in an estimated $205,900 in additional revenue. The combination of expenditure savings and additional revenue is the total of $950,120 explained in the first recommendation of errata sheet 6. The second recommendation acknowledges the potential ongoing impact to fiscal year 2019 of the re-estimated fiscal year 2018 revenues. In this recommendation, approval of a net increase to revenue of $318,880 as detailed on the errata sheet is requested. The additional working capital and revenue total $1,269,000. The third recommendation of errata sheet 6 creates the offset to the additional resources required in a balanced budget. The offset is a recommended equivalent increase to ending working capital. And I would appreciate an amendment approving errata sheet 6.
I move approval of errata sheet 6.
Second.
Moved by Member McCoy, and second by Member Nanki. Is there discussion? Member Nanki.
Yeah, and I was very pleased when I saw this because that puts us back inside of the council policy for ending fund balance.
Great.
So, very pleased. Thank you.
Yes, Member Judy.
Yes, could somebody explain why a decrease in the cable franchise fee?
It's just simply based upon what we're trending right now. We have anticipated a decline, and that decline is occurring. So we needed to actually correctly acknowledge that, and this reduction to the estimate that was put in the proposed budget is that acknowledgement that that revenue is declining.
Perhaps franchise administrator Ryan Zink can provide detail on why the downward trend is occurring, why people are cutting the cable.
Yes, Ryan Zink, city's franchise administrator. Thank you for the question. As many of you know, there's with Netflix and other what is called kind of over-the-top streaming services, there's a move to kind of what I guess what they call cutting the cord. People moving from off of cable onto just internet services. And so we've anticipated that this would be coming, and I think up until this point, increases in the rates have been offsetting those decreases in subscriber numbers, but I think we're getting to that breaking point where that strategy by the cable companies is no longer working. So we're starting to see a decrease in that revenue.
Member Nanki.
Thank you. And Ryan and I are on part of a listserv on most of the telecommunications folks in the state of Oregon, and they've actually had a lot of conversations lately because all of their revenues have been declining for a few quarters, and,
Yep.
and ours is one of the few that actually had been increasing. And so it looks like it's catching up with us.
Yes.
Any other questions? Thank you.
So I believe we have a motion on the floor.
We do, huh? Okay.
Seconded by Member Nanki.
Thank you. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Okay. Motion passes. Thank you.
And then on to item 5A. This is the weekly summary that records the actions of the Budget Committee through May 2nd, 2018. And please note that attachment 1 of the summary includes the errata items with a budget impact that were approved last week. Items 5B through 5D are correspondence regarding library fees, emergency preparedness in West Salem, and sidewalk replacement. The remaining items in the agenda packet are staff reports related to specific actions required of the Budget Committee this evening, including approval of the City and Urban Renewal Agency ad valorem property tax levies and recommendation of the City and Urban Renewal Agency budgets to the City Council and Agency Board respectively. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. This evening, we have no public hearings on the agenda. We're going to have a presentation by Deputy City Manager Casey Duncan, an overview of service area good governance. Following his presentation, there'll be time for the Budget Committee to ask questions of staff and for discussion about the service area. And then following that discussion, Casey will present additional information that will be helpful with agenda item number 7B, committee discussion. And this item number 7B provides an opportunity for the Budget Committee to ask questions of staff about previous budget presentations and continued discussion about the budget proposals. It's also a good time to ask questions of staff related to previously provided information reports. And rather than introducing Casey between the presentations, we'll just allow him to begin his presentation and just roll through with us. Thank you.
Excellent. Good evening, Chair Moore Green and members of the Budget Committee. I'm Casey Duncan, back once again for the final area to review for the fiscal year 2019 proposed budget, and that is good governance. This includes departments and activities supporting the public-facing programs provided by the city. Good governance has an expenditure appropriation of $77.65 million, representing 19.9% of the city's service area budgets. This slide breaks down the $77.65 million good governance expenditure budget among the programs and centralized services that offer administrative, financial, purchasing, legal, fleet, human resources, risk management, and health benefit services to the dozens of programs that directly impact the residents of Salem day in and day out. The good governance service area includes the debt service for the city's pension obligation bond, which is allocated to each city department or fund budget with employees. It also includes a portion of the equipment replacement reserve dedicated to the replacement of the city's vehicles. A detailed list of vehicles proposed for replacement appears in the budget document beginning on page 99. Each city or department with a vehicle inventory has a unique cost center or reserve or cost centers depending on the number of funding sources. And departments allocate funding each year to either a pay-as-you-go replacement or feed the reserve to accrue funding for a planned future replacement need. The non-departmental appropriation in good governance includes costs with the citywide benefits as well as the general fund's $3 million contingency. Employee services is comprised of fleet services, self-insurance programs for health, workers' compensation and liability insurance, employee relations, recruitment, records management, policy development, and contract negotiations for 5 collective bargaining groups. IT document services is demand on copy, mail, print production, graphic design, imaging and archiving, and mail messenger services budgeted in the City Services Fund. Legal provides a consultation and representation required by the city for the purpose of creating ordinances, administrative rules, real estate documents, contracts, and agreements. The department also represents the city in litigation and offers records management and election official services in the city recorder's office. Trust is primarily an appropriated contingency of $500,000 that can be accessed for any of the city's trust funds to address an unanticipated expenditure requirement during the course of the fiscal year. An enterprise embodying good governance is managed to be fiscally sustainable, provide quality services, proactively engage residents, be forward-thinking, and build capacity and partnerships for the future. Key services and programs support the mayor and city council, volunteer boards, and advisory commissions, and community partners to deliver services, prepare an annual budget and financial reports, and forecast future capital and service needs to support the municipal corporation, communicate with residents, provide access to public records, support local election processes, and offer legal counsel to all city departments, manage city-owned leased properties, vehicles, and equipment, and recruit, train, and develop employees. Some of the notable accomplishments during this fiscal year in the area of good governance include the following. An independent evaluation of fleet services operations was completed early in the current fiscal year, and based on the recommendations in the study, processes are being aligned to reflect industry best practices. Risk management continues to actively manage the city's liability and workers' compensation claims. The city's workers' compensation experience modifier, a reflection of claims and their costs, is 0.86. This is the lowest it has been since 1997 and has allowed for lower program costs and projections. The second phase of the unrepresented compensation classification study was completed. This budget includes a final alignment of positions to create internal equity and simplify the classification and compensation review process. Bonds were issued for a new police facility and library upgrades, and Urban Renewal Agency short-term de jure borrowings totaling $22.5 million were executed. The city restructured debt to generate $9.5 million in future savings to utility customers and received an AA2 rating from Moody's for the utility and general funds prior to the bond refinancings. The fiscal year 19 budget book and presentation format during the budget meetings is part of an effort to deliver on the strategic plan's sustainable service objective to redesign the budget process. Further refinements will take place as we continue to learn, gather feedback and information, and include performance metrics. The fiscal year 19 proposed budget includes the following actions to improve services and implement priority-based budgeting in accordance with the strategic plan and council policy agenda. The legal department will be exploring software solutions to better manage public records requests and meet the new mandatory timelines for response. Risk management has created a safety incentive program in which employees can submit applications for safety enhancements and receive funding for qualifying ideas that serve to prevent accidents. The Human Resources Department is in a multi-year project involving technology solutions to modernize onboarding and performance management systems. A new performance appraisal that aligns with the city's organizational values is being rolled out in conjunction with an electronic appraisal system. A vendor for a long-discussed employee health clinic has been selected and contract negotiations are underway. The clinic is expected to reduce health plan costs and improve employee wellness. The clinic should open before the end of the fiscal year. As noted in the budget document, the self-insurance fund proposes an additional position with a focus on employee wellness. As recommended by the city's leadership team, 2 positions with communications responsibilities, one from urban development and one from the library, are being transferred to the city manager's office to join what will become the Office of Communications. The office will focus on the coordination and quality of city communications across the organization and will train and support individuals throughout the organization who communicate with the public in various mediums, including the city's website. The city is engaging the services of Resource X to implement a National League of Cities and International City-County Managers Association best practice for budgeting. Priority-based budgeting will assist the Budget Committee and City Council with allocating available resources through an approach that identifies the organization's desired outcomes and examines the influence of each program and service in achieving those results. This initiative results from the strategic plan sustainable services goal of aligning expenditures and revenues while maintaining an adequate fund balance for the future. The annual cost of the priority-based budgeting software, including the open budget portal for the public and a resource diagnostic tool, is $40,000 annually. This expense will be charged to the general fund, with other funds contributing over $23,000 for their proportionate share. As mentioned in the budget message, priority-based budgeting will be one tool to help with identifying priority outcomes, the relative impact of individual programs and services on achieving results, and opportunities for partnering or redesigning service delivery to reduce costs. Priority-based budgeting, however, is a means to an end and not an end of itself. It creates a framework for decision makers to allocate resources efficiently and to the highest and best use. One likely outcome of priority-based budgeting will be a confirmation that current revenue sources are insufficient to meet growth demands and deliver the services deemed essential by the community. Resource X will be in Salem on May 15th for the initial kickoff. Budget Committee members have received an invitation to learn more about priority-based budgeting at a noon meeting that will be held here in council chambers on that day, and the session will be recorded for later viewing by those who are unable to attend. That concludes the service area presentation for good governance, and staff is available to answer questions related to these budgets.
Thank you, Casey. Member Bennett.
Casey, the the wellness clinic, is that still planned for for City Hall, to be in City Hall?
It will be at a location outside of City Hall. In fact, they found that it's most effective for employers in order to maintain that sense of confidentiality and get good use out of the clinic, to have it nearby, but not necessarily co-located within the same facility. So we are looking at options that are close to City Hall.
Okay. Does this include in the understanding the Blight to Bright program? Where is that? In this area somewhere in the self-insurance? I'm not sure I understood that one completely.
Sure. So the initial funding does come from the liability fund to initiate that program, being that there is
So it's in here, in this part, or where is it? No?
No, that was under Welcoming and Livable Community presented last week.
They'll certainly know if there are questions regarding the
week prior.
program. We have staff here tonight that can answer those.
No, I just wanted to know if it was, I wasn't sure what fund it came from, if it was in self-insurance or where it was.
Sure. So there's a transfer that takes place from the liability fund to initiate that program.
And then finally, on the unrepresented compensation and classification program that's underway, you've apparently completed part of it for this year, and then you're going to look at an implementation in 2019. Do I understand that?
So the implementation of the banding that's been recommended is happening in 2019, as well as the study recommended that the city have more available step increases based on merit performance, and that will be rolling out and is part of the budget that's before you this evening.
How many unclassified and classified and unrepresented, how many unrepresented employees are there?
Do you know? I want to say around 250, but 215, I'm being told.
Well, how will that be presented to council? How will that come to us? Will it be through the manager, or how will we see that?
So, Mina Hansen, HR Director. So this was a project you may recall from 2 budget cycles ago. We authorized the study of the class and comp. So stage 1 was we reviewed all of the compensation, and we rolled out through the last budget process, and you approved that to develop a 13-step program for non-represented. So we moved all of our non-reps to a 13-step pay plan, and we aligned those with market. That was step 1 during the first year. One of the best practices that was recommended by the consultants was that we would do what's called broadbanding in year 2. Broadbanding has less financial impact. What broadbanding is, it eases our ability to manage the plan. So we look at internal equity, we look at scope of responsibility, and developed a matrix to say these groups of positions are like in kind. So when we do future compensation analysis, we look at the entire group based on span of control, organizational impact, internal equity, so that it eases the burden of looking at each position individually, but looks at classifications of positions.
The reason I'm asking is council acts on our labor contracts, and we're talking about a substantial portion of our employees. I don't know if we act on this, if we get briefed on it, if we get a chance to look at some of the categories where you're looking at various kinds of comparable, you're talking about, equity and things like that. That would seem like something we'd get a chance to be briefed on. I don't know if that's appropriate or not, so it's up to you, Mr. Manager.
We can certainly provide a status report to council that would include the analysis on those issues that you're raising.
Well, I would like to suggest we do that, and I'd suggest at least part of that occur in executive session so we can have a candid conversation about it. I want to understand what's going on here.
Member Anderson?
Stay up, please, Ms. Hanson. Both you and I were part of an organization in our prior lives that had a wellness center, and I'm wondering if you could talk about both the anticipated cost decreases that you see and how you see them, and also about, does this help employee morale in any way?
So with the historically, Councilor Anderson's referring to Safe Corporation had an employee health clinic. Now, they were a fully insured program, so their return on investment was a little different than ours will be. They saw a $1 million return on investment in a 5 to 10 year cycle, but they were still fully insured. What we look as a comparator in best practice is we're looking at Deschutes County, for example, has a clinic, and they've seen in the first year about a 20% return on investment. We achieve that through employees having greater access. We're not undercutting the current market. We want them to see their primary care physicians, but we're a market with short availability of primary care. So we want to be that middle ground, a little more than an urgent care clinic, a little less than your primary care, to fill that gap, to provide greater access, and also to actually be proactive in our wellness activities. Right now, we're somewhat reactive and we're not really staffed for it. We expect, or we anticipate based on the literature, that we'll see a 25 to 30% reduction in our costs, and where we're self-insured, we'll achieve that in a fairly short period of time.
Thank you. I do have another question. I'm looking at page 206, the Employee Services Department Summary of Services and Program, and I think this is a good thing. And I look at, for example, the Human Resources Administration. Last year, you had 9 employees and $1,572,000. This year, you have 9 employees and $1,505,000. I presume that a higher salaried employee has left and you've replaced that person with a lower salaried employee?
We've had a couple of highly tenured employees who've retired, and we had some payouts that caused us to go up last year, and so new hires obviously come in a little differently.
That's good. And I don't think anybody's here from information technology, but the same thing happened with them. They managed to save $220,000 with the same number of employees, so that's a good thing too.
And on that note, we've had quite a bit of retirements, so that has created some savings in personnel services.
Member Bennett?
On fleet services, I was just curious. I noticed just looking at the numbers, it undergoes a fairly, not quite a $500,000, but getting there, reduction in 2019. Do I understand correctly what the numbers are saying here?
In which line? I'm sorry.
I'm on 206 as well, I think. Yeah, maybe not.
Yes, that's correct.
Yeah, okay.
I got down to 0.
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of wondered kind of what's going on in fleet services if...
Well, we've had a couple things go on in fleet services. Out of the study that we had done, we looked at our management structure, and we were pretty top-heavy. And so we've made some changes. And so instead of having 2 highly compensated managerial positions, we're only going to have 1 manager. And we'll have a service writer to be the customer service liaison. So there's some staffing issues that have gone on there.
Well, have people been terminated? Is that what happened here? Okay. Just retired and...
We've had some turnover.
Okay.
Member McCoy?
Mine again, back to the wellness clinic to make sure I understand. You said 25 to 30% in savings coming from just a lower self-insured cost for medical insurance?
Right. So most of the lower costs will come in 2 areas primarily. One is that right now, as a self-insured employer, obviously we pay exactly the rack rate of what we get charged. And a clinic, an office visit, includes the doctor's overhead, the business acquisition, and the various insurance expenses within that. So by doing it ourselves, we cut out some of that overhead. The other big area that most clinics see a big savings in is prescription drugs. So we will be able to provide to employees who come to the clinic a list of very specific, for example, antibiotics without the markup that you see at the pharmacy. So it will be a straight pass-through at cost. So we'll see cost savings there. The other thing we're hoping for, obviously, is healthier employees, and that's why we're going to have the wellness coordinator added on, so we can do a nexus that allows us to have exercise programs and nutrition programs and weight loss programs that then tie back to that medical evidence-based model.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Discussion? Very good. Okay. We're going to move now to our committee discussion. And this is an opportunity for the Budget Committee to discuss any items or issues or concerns regarding the agenda items or items not on the agenda. This is also an opportunity for anybody to declare a conflict of interest.
What can we talk about?
Yes.
What are we talking about? At this point, are we making motions or do we ask staff?
Staff, help me. Help me. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to present to you this evening. As requested by the Budget Committee in some previous meetings, we have more information for you related to PERS, property taxes, and an updated forecast. Some of that information was shared previously by Budget Officer Jacobs in the errata. PERS and property taxes are two of the major drivers in building the budget and in forecasting future revenues and projecting the future costs to continue the services recommended in the proposed budget. PERS is a very nuanced and complicated system, and time does not afford us the opportunity to attempt to gain a full understanding of how the system works. And quite honestly, I don't know that I could fully explain how the system works, but we have experts here that will help to do our best. The slide, however, represents the fundamental PERS equation based on an employee receiving post-retirement benefits. This formula assumes that the market will provide certain levels of return on contributions made into the system. The present value of the benefits earned on one side of the equation determines what is required on the other side in order to pay the earned benefit. Rates and earnings expectations are expected to ensure that the system returns to a 100% funded status within 20 years. When the PERS Board takes action based on variances and assumptions, such as making changes to actuarial tables to extend benefits based on increased life expectancy, or reducing the assumed rate of earnings due to market performance, the unfunded liability can increase and employer contributions are adjusted in order to eventually make the equation whole. The proposed budget incorporates the actual rates set by PERS that are in effect from July 1, 2017 through June 30th of 2019. Changes to the PERS system have occurred over time, resulting in 3 tiers, Tiers 1 and 2 in the Oregon Public Service Retirement Plan, or OPSRP, which separates general employees from police and fire employees that are eligible for retirement at an earlier age. One public entity's rates can vary from another based on a number of factors, including the employer tier mix and any side accounts established to reduce unfunded liabilities. The unfunded liability for PERS Tier 1 and 2 members is much higher, resulting in higher rates for this tier of employees. As this slide shows, in comparison to all entities in the PERS system, Salem has a larger proportion of employees in Tiers 1 and 2. It's important to note that the city's budget and forecast includes PERS expenses at the individual employee level, and this process allows us to accurately account for each employee's PERS expense, included projected cost of living and merit increases. This slide demonstrates the PERS unfunded liability status as of the end of 2016. As I mentioned on the previous slide, some entities have established side accounts to reduce the overall liability and the employer contribution rates. The city issued debt in 2008 that has reduced the total liability shown here by approximately $51 million, and the side account has produced favorable results, with earnings resulting in 5 to 7% savings in PERS rates annually. And to date, these savings have exceeded the amount of debt service payments required to issue the pension obligation bonds. The recommended budget before you this evening assumes PERS actual rates and full employment, with any new or presently unfilled positions being assigned an OPSRP rate rather than a higher Tier 1 or Tier 2 rate. Actual hiring could actually increase that expense. This slide demonstrates what was provided to the city as advisory rates issued for the next biennium for each PERS tier, and the rates assumed for those years in the forecast. An update provided at the December PERS board meetings indicated that with 2018 earnings, the actual rates could come in lower than previously advised or closer to 5 percentage points above the current rates. The gray on the slide represents the range between the PERS advisory rates and an amount that is 5 percentage points over current PERS rates. The black bar represents what is included in the forecast, and you can see that we are forecasting at the bottom or below the range in our efforts to be realistic with projections. PERS applies what is known as a rate collar to limit rate increases to employers. However, the limitation effectively spreads out larger increases over a longer period of time. Rate collars allow a certain level of predictability in future rate assumptions. When the PERS funded percentage for an employer is between 70 and 100%, the single rate collar limits PERS rate increases to the greater of 3 percentage points or 20% higher than the current entity rates, excluding side account relief. The city is anticipating rate increases in the single rate collar for the final biennium of the forecast. In summary, we believe our PERS rate estimates to be objective. The rates in the current budget are set, and the city does not have an ability to modify the PERS system. The legislature made fairly recent attempts to reform the system, and the most significant reforms were overturned with the Moreau decision, which found the reforms to be an impairment of a contractual obligation. The city has actively followed PERS issues and works closely with the Finance Committee to keep the City Council informed, and will continue to look at, evaluate, and bring forward to the City Council any potentially advantageous options available to the city to reduce the cost of meeting this legacy obligation. Similar to PERS, Oregon's property tax system is nuanced and complex. Two measures passed by voters in the 90s set limitations on taxes that can be imposed and the valuation of a property at which taxes can be assessed. Measure 50 imposes a limit on the assessed value growth of an existing property to 3% year over year. New property or material changes to existing property are a few mechanisms that can produce growth above the 3% threshold. This chart demonstrates the change to assessed value in the current year assessments and the prior year for all properties in Salem city limits, including both Marion and Polk counties. The dark blue slice of the pie, totaling nearly 78%, represents properties that have experienced no change outside of the 3% growth limit. Residential properties make up 67% of total property values in Salem. The total assessed valuation of residential properties increased by about 4% year over year. While there has been some noticeable increase in multifamily developments and a 4.77% change in assessed value, multifamily properties make up just about 1/4% of the total assessed value for all Salem properties. Industrial properties account for about 2.6% of total assessed value in Salem, and the total assessed value in this category of properties decreased by 5% year over year. The remainder of properties fall in the commercial class, which experienced a 3% year-to-year change in assessed value. There are factors such as depreciable real property, central tax assessment on utilities, tax-exempt properties, and property abatements that lead to variations in and limitations to property tax income growth for non-residential properties. Property taxes are by far the largest source of revenue available to the general fund. The proposed budget incorporates fiscal year 17-18 property values received in October of each year, as well as prior year development activity to forecast budgeted property tax revenue. Our property tax model looks at properties at the individual level, applying growth assumptions on a property-by-property basis according to the property type. Although there are many variables, this process allows us to model and project future values with a high degree of accuracy, as demonstrated in this slide. With where it appears we will close the fiscal year, the accuracy level for property tax receipts in each of the last 3 years will be over 99.4%. The Budget and Finance Division is working with IT to use GIS technology to help us improve our forecasting model and better predict changes to property taxes. This screenshot demonstrates properties where permits totaling more than 25,000 have been issued over the past 5 years. This will enable us to better determine possible timing and the extent to which growth will translate into additional property tax revenue. In order to continue to improve on the reliability of our forecasting, the city engaged University of Oregon economics professor Tim Dewey to conduct an analysis to find whether Salem has economic indicators with a strong correlation to revenue. Mr. Dewey concluded that the state of Salem's economy doesn't appear to impact revenue growth. The good news, he stated, is that without a significant decline in the housing market, the revenue downside is limited. The bad news is that even with a good economy, the upside appears limited as well. One insight that may be drawn from this conclusion is the need for a more diversified revenue stream. As presented by Budget Officer Jacobs this evening, the updates of year-end estimates for fiscal year 2018 yield an additional $950,000 of working capital, increasing the estimate on page 111 of the budget book from $22.77 million to $23.72 million. The increase to working capital is a combination of net increase to revenue of approximately $206,000 and additional expenditure savings of about $744,000. The additional expenditure savings are primarily related to positions that have not been filled or are vacant. The general fund 5-year forecast on this slide includes the increase to working capital from the previous slide and represents a re-estimate over the next 5 years using the fiscal year 2019 budget as the proposed budget as a base. This includes an ongoing increase for franchise fees and state shared revenues. Working capital remains within the parameters of City Council policy at the end of fiscal year 2019, but quickly falls below policy in the next fiscal year and is almost entirely used to balance expenditures by the end of year fiscal 2021. This reforecast includes an annual savings projection of 2.5%, which aligns with current experience and considers the possibility of declining expenditure savings resulting from fewer position vacancies. The current revenues and net expenditures displayed on the previous slide translate to this graph, demonstrating a structural imbalance in the general fund between the cost of desired services and the annual revenue available to support them. Net expenditures reflect the results of department savings estimates and unspent contingency funds. Without new revenue or service reductions, the anticipated gap of $3 million this current year is expected to increase to $4 million in fiscal year 19 and widen in the outgoing years. This demonstration of forecast variability was first presented in December 2017 with the original 5-year forecast presentation. The blue bar reflects the probable outcome for working capital in our updated forecast and compares it to the City Council's working capital policy, which is represented on the graph by the gold line. The green bar would add another 1% of revenue and 1% of expenditure savings to that probable outcome, while the red bar demonstrates the opposite, 1% lower revenue and 1% greater expense. And that concludes this presentation, and staff and I are available for questions prior to your deliberations.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay, Member Bennett, and then Member Nanke. Thank you.
Are you looking at all at doing another pension obligation bond issuance in the during your planning period?
Yes, that is, I mentioned, something that we'll continue to look at to see if those opportunities are advantageous to the city. We recently had a discussion with the Finance Committee. We know that there was some legislation passed that could provide some incentive for cash-funded side accounts. And in looking at that, we weren't able to identify cash resources within a lot of our funds to be able to set that aside. But it's still something that we can continue to explore. David Lacey's here this evening. He attends all the PERS board meetings, works with our financial advisors who assist other communities in those types of items. And we're staying well informed, and we'll look at opportunities.
Are those incentives rich enough to really save us enough money compared to the impact on our available revenue? I mean, I looked at them from a different perspective, and it looked like it was a pretty low amount of money, and you really got very little return for it.
So in terms of a cash funded side account, we determined that it would take about 10 million to make a real significant difference. And as I mentioned, and you mentioned, the availability of revenue to put aside can be outweighed by the need for continued services, and it may not be advisable.
So at 10 million, what does your annual savings look like in your PERS bill?
I believe it was about 750,000 annually.
So 750,000 per 10 million,
And that's over a 20-year period.
and that's your 20-year life. Where are you in your pension obligation bonds at this point? You 15?
So that expires in 2028, so we're about halfway
10 in?
through.
Okay. Thank you.
Member Danke?
Thank you. One of the conversations that we haven't really had this year is compression. But I noted that less than zero on assessments was like 5 or 6%. I'm assuming that is compression. And what is the
Correct.
foregone revenue from that? And are we looking at that improving over the next couple of years, or what's the rationale for why they're still there?
Correct. As far as the residential properties go, that's tended to correct itself. As I mentioned, there are a variety of other factors that could influence, for example, an industrial property that has a lot of real property within it, equipment that depreciates over time. Right. They may experience a decrease in their property taxes as that property decreases, and then when it's replaced, they would see an increase. So there is compression occurring still throughout the city, but it's limited somewhat with our residential properties. We're not seeing the same losses that we once were.
Cool. Thank you.
And actually, sorry to just give an example. So some may be familiar, but when a new property comes on the tax roll, it comes on at what is referred to as a change property ratio. So that essentially looks at what is the assessed value of properties in that class and what's the real market value. And for residential properties, that factor is about 73%. So a home that's valued at $300,000 would come on the tax rolls at about $216,000. If I did the math correctly. And for commercial and residential, however, the change property ratio is still closer to 1. And you may recall with the Measure 5 limitation, that limits local government taxes to $10 per real market value. And so the combined tax rates of the entities within Marion County is above that $10.58, excuse me, is $10.58 above the $10 limitation. So when those properties come on right at real market value, that would result in some compression loss.
Yay. If I can just follow up one piece in regards to Mayor Bennett's comment. There was, with that side account funded by cash balance, there was a concern that we may or may not qualify.
Yeah, it's a little bit unknown as to whether that's a first come, first serve. There are a lot of school districts who have a higher unfunded liability percentage than we do. At first, we didn't know if we would meet, I think it's the 200% threshold, and to qualify, and whether or not they included the side account. Most recently, it looks as though we could qualify, but I think that $25 million that's available is not going to go real far, and will probably be divvied out first among the most needed, who have the largest unfunded liability assessment.
The ones who didn't actually account for it earlier.
Yeah.
Okay.
And if I may, some of Mr. Duncan's hesitancy to provide a more direct answers, because the rules have not been developed yet by PERS, have not been shared with members. So that's why we're unable to give you a more direct answer on qualification and what the thresholds are, because we don't know what those thresholds are.
Member Anderson.
You know, Casey, we have all these urban renewal districts in town, and the theory is that when the urban renewal districts end, the property taxes will be greater, and I presume that will there be a compression effect on that? That's my first question. My second question is, have you done any sort of studies to say, if we were to end Fairview, per se, as an urban renewal district, what would the effect be on the taxes that we would take in from the increased valuation? If they're already all in, then it doesn't make any difference if we end them. That wouldn't increase anything.
Sure. So in terms of how it relates to property taxes, recall, because there is that frozen base,
Yeah.
if a development occurs in an urban renewal area, then there isn't an additional tax benefit that comes. And Director Rutherford brought up the document that the Urban Renewal Agency had produced that kind of lists the return on investment in those areas and what that translates to. And with Fairview specifically, we're no longer collecting the increments, so we've got the money that's been discussed,
So
but
it's already
we're still
in.
collecting all taxes, and all jurisdictions are benefiting nearly as though that were closed.
Very good. Member McCoy.
Casey, back to the PERS, you were talking about it, and you showed what you were putting in the budget for this year. In percentages, what's that increase?
So that's about a 5% increase over
Well, I mean,
5 percentage point.
it's 5 points up, but it's 25% increase based on where we were this year?
Sure. Okay. So I'm being reminded that in the upcoming budgets, the rates are the same as they were in the prior year because the rates are established per biennium. It's the following year where we're projecting
Okay, that was
the increase.
for next year.
That's correct.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you. Okay. Now I'm going to tell you that this is the opportunity for the Budget Committee to discuss any issues or concerns regarding the agenda items or items not on the agenda. It's also an opportunity for any conflicts of interest to be noted. Yes, Member Bassett.
Yes, thank you. Later tonight, we'll be talking about the capital improvement items in the operating budget. And I just have 3 brief things that I'd like to mention. First one is that I'd request that in the future, staff prepare a breakout that shows capital improvement expenditures by fiscal year as they are intended. Usually the actual expenditures are a half or a third of what is budgeted for the next operating year, fiscal year. The second item is that I would ask that I be recorded as a no vote on item number 30 on page 331. And then the last item is that I am announcing a potential conflict of interest on agenda items related to Marine Drive. My wife and I own property east of 2030 Wallace Road. It doesn't have an address. It has a tax number of 565287. That property does not have any frontage on Marine Drive, but it is nearby. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Bassett. So noted. Member Anderson.
I don't know, excuse me, if this is the right time to discuss the library fines for children's books.
Yes, it is.
Okay, I have a concern about that because I think that the concerns raised at, I think, our first budget meeting have some validity, which, if I can summarize them, is there are a lot of minority folks here who have some concerns about being able to pay those fees, or lower income people would be another way, versus the benefit of getting children to, at an early age, to read and to understand the library. I'm wondering again if there's somebody who can tell us how much money was actually recovered from children's books fine. I thought it was around $40,000 or $30,000. So to me, if that's what it is, at some point, I don't know if now's the right point, but I'm going to move to, as part of the budgetary process, to cancel out those fines. And I'm sure the library can figure out some way to deal with the issue. For example, you cannot check out another set of books unless you returns the books you've already checked out. Because I know now, I kind of have a running fine there, and I come up, I could still check out books if I don't have money to pay my fine at the time, and I think that's probably the way it works for children's books too. So that might be one way to solve the issue of, people just not returning the books and not coming. So if now is the appropriate time, I'll make the motion, or should I make it at some later point?
Well, maybe we could get some information on what you're asking for.
Okay,
I only
okay.
heard one piece of testimony, so I'd like to hear.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, Member Haslett?
Yes, I had a question going back to fleet replacement, especially on items number 11 and 12. You have two Tahoes, same description, everything. One comes in at a price of $49,330. The second identical vehicle is $40,310.
What page, please?
$9,000 difference.
98.
Thank you.
99, page 99.
Thank you.
On the same vehicle, $9,000 difference.
And if I could, please? I think
Yes, please.
I know what probably is happening there. There are varying levels of upfit that occur to the vehicles, and so the difference in cost could be as the result of the upfitting for that vehicle. Oh, and I was just informed that one of the vehicles is intended for the K-9, for a K-9 vehicle.
They both say K9.
Then it could very well just be a differences in upfitting for the vehicles. We can certainly, that's the equipment that's put in the vehicle and on the vehicle, so we can find out for you. We'll do our best to find out.
Okay. Member Nanki? Member Nanki, did you have a question? Comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Yes.
More comment in regards to the library book fines. Because I heard some discussion out in the public regarding, personal responsibility and making sure people bring their books back in a timely manner. I understand that some people don't necessarily have the transportation and timing to where they could do that, but getting back to the red light camera debate that we had several years ago, there was comment in regards to if one were to increase the yellow light cycle timing, people wouldn't run the red light. So my opposition or comments to Councilor Anderson's position would be, what is the time frame that one would have to buy or pay a fine for now, and could we look at potentially extending that out just a little bit, and would that alleviate the issue?
Okay.
So
Sounds like a
I don't know
policy question.
who would potentially have that answer, but
Okay, hold on.
there's more than one way to get around certain issues as well.
Norman Rye, Community Development Director. We did a memo that was provided in the previous packet from 2 weeks ago where we had mentioned that the report for analyzing the whole matter of getting rid of the overdue fines for children's materials would be a staff report that we would try to submit at a later date. So some of this information I can try to provide now, for example, on budget impacts, that sort of thing, but some of it I would encourage us to consider as part of that staff memo that we had mentioned in our previous memo. Right. We would provide at a later date. The budget impact for overdue fines is $24,300. That would be the reduction in revenue based on the average of the past 2 years of collections that we've received. The total time that is allowed for an item to be checked out in order to then be returned prior to being considered late is not information that I have on me right now, but we do have about a 42-day period that we consider to be the tolerance at which, after that 43rd day, we consider an item lost or stolen. And so that's the policy that we have for that particular time frame. But the point at which it is overdue, if I may, I'd like to have that for a report that we'll have later in the year.
Sure. And if I could just add, when my son was in school early on in life, I would come upon library books that it's like, oh, we forgot to bring those back. So it's not necessarily the ability of one to bring them back. Sometimes it's just forgetting that you have them. So a longer duration can be a net negative at times as well. More time to forget they're actually in your possession.
Member Tigan, did you have a question?
No, I was just going to pull that same number out of the report. I mean, I think that what I'm hearing is just an interest in seeing different approaches to how to handle youth fines, whether it's a voluntary system to pay back and just a forgiveness ability on behalf of the library. I mean, I have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old who frequent the library. I think I paid our fines before the first budget committee meeting. But, I think that just getting kids into the library is the most important thing. And $24,000 is worth that. And if that's keeping children out of the library, we should look at it.
Okay, Member Anderson? No, you're okay? All right. Member...
I had the figure in mind, the $24,300 too, so I don't need...
Okay, all right. Member Kaiser.
Thank you. I don't want to be a wet blanket on this conversation, but I want to make sure that we're not overstepping our bounds and into city manager territory, because I do not want this level to be controlling a bunch of fines that departments issue, because otherwise our council meetings are going to become increasingly long if we have to bring every adjustment to something to council or budget committee. So I am perfectly comfortable with letting the library make that decision for themselves. And I realize this is a budgetary impact, but they're planning for that impact. And if there's a policy discussion to be had, then I would say that needs to be presented like any other type of staff-initiated policy update, that comes through, city manager powers and then comes to council to talk about. But, I agree with a lot of the sentiments that have been stated here, but I just don't feel that this is our place as a budget committee to be making this decision.
Thank you. Member Anderson.
Thank you. There are a number of issues that any one of us counselors bring up, not expecting to have them passed, but expecting to have a robust discussion about them, and I think that's what we have here. And if what Director Wright is saying, that he's heard some of the things that have been said here, and there may be ways internally for the library to look at this and deal with it in some other ways, I'm satisfied with that it's a matter that was brought to your attention and to our attention, and you've heard some of the feelings, not just of the Budget Committee, but also of the Council, and I know you will be able to review this and fashion some policy that is in accordance with what you've heard, and also, I don't know if I could say best library practices, but something akin to that.
Thank you. Okay. Member Nordyke and then Member Judy.
Thank you. My personal position on whether or not to have fines for children's books would be to not have fines, just to ensure equal access to library resources for everyone, regardless of where they come from, and for all the socioeconomic factors that play into fines and how they can be perceived, what the costs are. And anything we can do to reduce barriers to the library, particularly for our vulnerable populations, is something I would support. However, I also recognize what Councilor Kaiser has pointed out, which is once we start looking at expenditures in the $24,000 range, we're getting into the minutia of city funding. And as I recall from our previous materials, the city was going to go back and take a closer look at what kind of policy they would want to come up for when it comes to children's funds. So on one hand, I think it's important to state my position on children's fines, but also I recognize that this is city staff's area of expertise. And again, I would also discourage getting into the minutia of our budget. Thank you.
Thank you. Member Judy.
I'm going to kind of change directions a little bit here. I have a lot of concern regarding lack of revenue in general. I'm the newbie on the block, so to speak, and so I don't have a huge historical perspective on where we've been in the past. By my calculation, we have something like $2 million worth of new stuff we've added this year, and yet it's all unfunded. We're using working capital to pay for it. And the city manager has said this is last year we can use working capital to pay for stuff. And, I know that last meeting, Mayor Bennett mentioned that there would be likely a revenue committee and that there would be some sort of bond discussion for infrastructure. And I'm just wondering if this unfunded new stuff that we've added in this year and other years would also be included in that infrastructure bond. And if they're not approved, what happens then? Do we start cutting? Because it's either add revenue or start cutting. And, it kind of like, can we in good conscience add this stuff when we don't really know whether we're going to be able to fund it down the road?
Member Bennett.
Yeah, unless the manager wants to, I'll give you from my perspective. I'll be making a motion this evening regarding a revenue task force. Ask the budget committee to recommend that to the council. I'll do that whenever it's appropriate. I'll just give you my perspective. I've been doing budget, and so has Nanki, for years. And every year, we are just a couple of years from the cliff. And it's real, but it's also theoretical, because we haven't hit the cliff yet after, I don't know how many years for me, 15. And Anderson, I think, drew the best kind of analogy to sort of Thelma and Louise, only they turn right just before they hit the cliff and keep going along the edge, or something like that. I think it was that movie, something like that. But it is real, and we need to come to grips with it, and we need to develop a bond strategy. I mean, you're really hitting on it, Joyce, and so we'll talk about it a little later, if that's okay.
Member Nanki, then Member McCoy.
Yeah, and in regards to the bonding, that's more of a capital type infrastructure type mechanism versus a levy, which is operation. So what we're looking at is that working capital, not to be confused with capital, on general fund, as far as the actual fund that we seem to have the biggest problems in. So that's where we need to right size, either through an increase in revenue or a decrease in expenditure.
Thank you.
You would have made it more articulate. Yeah.
Anything else? Okay. Yes. Thank you, Budget Officer.
I can actually answer the car question.
Okay.
Or
There we go.
The police car
Okay.
question. Here we go.
Oh, I thought you were talking about the car next to the cliff.
No, actually, that's for you all to answer. I'll answer this one. Actually, those vehicles were originally both K-9 vehicles. One's being replaced as a K-9 vehicle. The other was stripped down and had been used as an unmarked vehicle, and so that replacement is actually of an unmarked vehicle, so less upfit. So just one will be a K-9 vehicle, one will be just a regular unmarked vehicle.
Thank you.
The hostess of knowledge. Right.
Member Milton.
Hello? Oh, sorry. Something got brought up to me today, and I don't know if this is the appropriate time for it, but last year when we were going through our budget meeting, we had, I don't remember which budget committee member mentioned a independent auditor. Where are we at with that? What was the outcome? I mean, I remember the outcome we missed by like one vote, but we were supposed to be revisiting this again. And I know unfortunately, due to vacations, I missed our last two meetings. Has there been any follow-up discussion? And where are we at for this year regarding that? Because I know that was a very strong discussion piece we all had.
council has many strong discussions, and I don't recall, and I don't think there was any specific direction to continue to look at an independent performance auditor, so therefore there was no further staff work. Typically, by council rule, if an analysis is going to require more than an hour of time, that needs to be a motion, not just a general discussion, particularly by those who are on the non-prevailing side of an issue. As far as the question of performance auditing, I think there was an example mentioned earlier this evening by our HR Director, Mina Hansen, where we did do a performance review, a performance audit of our fleet services. So we're going to continue to look at those program-specific opportunities. A more general performance auditing approach is included in our strategic plan, but it has not advanced. We're starting with the priority-based budgeting, starting with the strategic planning, the annual policy agenda, but that performance auditing piece is still an important component, but there wasn't any specific additional work done on the motion that failed last year.
Do we plan on revisiting it?
If that's a direct question to me, I just answered that it's part of our strategic plan. If the Budget Committee or Council wishes to address it further, that would be a vote by this body or by Council.
I don't know.
There you go. No, unless you make a motion.
Hold on. I don't know. Okay. I'll hold off.
Okay, all right. Member Kaiser.
Thank you. I'm going to bring up an unrelated topic, partly because of, since we've found, I don't know if that's the right word, some more working capital.
I don't know.
That's not the right word.
So we don't fund employees to utilize the existing.
There's more. Anyways, as you know, we just passed the Maple Winter Greenway, and as part of that, there were stop signs, the inclusion of stop signs added on that route, which council passed and adopted. And how I understand it is those stop signs are being installed this fiscal year. And as part of that plan, there are speed humps in the plan to be installed. And because the stop signs are being included and added so quickly, I would like to propose adding those speed humps this fiscal year as well. So I don't know if I need to make a motion or how that's going to work or how that works under this kind of new model.
The wish list.
To fund those speed humps is what I'm trying to get at.
It's already part.
The speed bumps are in the work plan, right?
The speed humps. Bumps
We
like
call them
this and
bumps where
humps
I
like
come
that.
from in eastern Washington, yeah.
They are in the plan. It's been adopted by council.
And
This
they have a
is-
time they'll come online.
They do not have a time they'll come online. It's not funded currently.
So
but
which year
because
do you
we
want to
added-
fund them?
Yes, because we added the stop signs as well, and those are being installed
Right.
right now.
Yeah.
So it's going to create the opportunity for people to just fly down some of those streets without the added speed humps at the same time.
The bicyclists?
Traffic.
Oh.
Drivers.
Well, we get,
So
do you want
I-
to talk to Fernandez?
So I would like to talk about possibly funding those this year. If
Peter?
there's interest among the budget committee. And it's a relatively small ask. It's, if there was 10 speed humps funded, that'd be $50,000 max, since they're $3,000 to $5,000 each.
Member Judy?
So if we're going to add stuff, there are a whole lot of people out there that would very much like to see all of these sidewalks that aren't working very well funded. So, which is the higher priority, to fix the sidewalks that people are complaining about or your humps?
Well, so we're not jumping around in conversations. I'm just going to make a motion that we add speed humps in our budget to install the speed humps along the Maple Winter Greenway, and we can fund up to 10 of those at a cost of $50,000.
Discussion?
Question.
Member Bennett.
Well, I'll just speak to my motion, which is, in the plan, there are 7 identified speed humps, and then at our council deliberations, we added an additional, I think it was 2 by the School for the Deaf. So by my count, there would be no more than 10 speed humps installed along that route. And in the plan, it says those would cost between $3,000 and $5,000 to have. So if we funded at most 10 of them, it would be at most $50,000 added to our budget for this fiscal year.
Okay, Member Bennett, then Member Anderson.
The only question I've got is, does it need to go into the CIP, or how does this occur? No? Just put 50 grand into your budget, or just say you just spend it out of available revenue in your budget?
Who are you looking at?
Director Fernandez.
Or you could come down and talk to us for a minute.
I have to speak to the budget officer for a minute.
He's going to go to the alternate podium.
Yeah. Peter Fernandez, Public Works Director. So, yeah, if we have the direction to put those in, then it sounds like it would come out of Fund 155, out of the Transportation Services Fund. So it would be directed to spend up to $50,000, and something else doesn't get done. So,
and just a clarification, that is a different fund than the updated forecast that the Budget Committee received this evening.
Right. Unless you want to allocate general fund, then the budget officer can get back up and tell you all about that.
No, I don't necessarily want to do that. This is still this is my second year, so I'm still learning.
Well, I wanted to ask him one more question, if I may.
Yes.
Yeah. So these 2 funds you're talking about, maybe it'd be really good to clarify when you say you do this, one other thing might not happen. I mean, you're not.
Sure. So
but what's the trade-off?
Sure. The Transportation Services Fund, also known as Fund 155, is primarily gas tax funded. That's where we operate and maintain our street system, including sidewalk maintenance.
Okay.
Is coming out of that fund. So we do not have, installing signs is fairly inexpensive, so that's why I made the commitment when the Maple Winter Greenway was adopted, that we would install the signs, and we're working on that installation. Doing the speed humps is an additional amount that we had not anticipated funding this coming year. If we're directed to install them, then we will have that direction. It's just, it's a multi-million-dollar fund, so $50,000 isn't going to stop anything from happening, but it's an expense that we had not anticipated. So it would just be absorbed in the budget somehow.
For the counselor to make a motion and to really be informed on it, does she need to know the trade-offs, or are we talking about a trade-off that is so insubstantial and de minimis she isn't going to care that one of her sidewalks doesn't get fixed? Because that's the equation.
Well,
right
that is an equation. The reality, I don't want to stand up here and say, hey, $50,000 doesn't mean anything to us, and then all of a sudden there's 15 $50,000 items.
Right.
So if this is the only item, we can certainly, with direction from the Budget Committee Council, we can certainly make that happen. But my caution is that, if we're going to have more of these, then at some point I'll stand up, or the budget officer will stand up and says, hey, we need a whole report on this. We really need to think about this.
So her motion's going to be to which fund, then? What's her motion going to affect? Which fund?
I don't want to put words in her mouth.
Well,
I think she wanted to say.
I think
she wanted to say general fund, but it's up to her.
No, she didn't.
Well, she talked about the extra money in the
Now, she had.
I will amend my motion, I guess, to clarify that would be Fund 155.
The seconder is okay with that.
Yeah.
Okay, and Member Anderson.
Here's how I look at this. We had a long discussion in council, lots of people testifying. There were at least 2 votes I think we took on this. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe it was only 1, but it was a 7-2 vote to put these things in. So if that's the way the council decided a few months ago, I can understand how signs are pretty easy. You got signs in the shop, you go out there you dig a hole, you put in concrete, you build a sign, but I can understand how speed humps are a little more, but I think the will of the council was, let's put these in. So that's why I'm going to support the motion.
Member Milton.
I'd like to just kind of, is it Judy or Joyce?
It's Joyce.
Joyce. So Joyce brings up a very valid point. I mean, what's our priority? And our priority is, what's a sidewalk? What is $50,000 in sidewalks repair? And, you know, does the street need to be repaired, or does the sidewalks need to be repaired? So I would vote against at this point.
Thank you. Member Nanki.
Thank you, Madam Chair. On the same issue, and it was a 7-2 vote not to put in the speed humps, it was the issue of dropping it to a 20-mile-per-hour zone 24 hours a day, and sticking in a bunch of stop signs without the speed humps there, which will actually increase speed, which actually, in my opinion, puts the cyclists in more danger and inconveniences the public during off hours as well. So for me to vote right now to stick the speed humps in, I'd like to see the speed go back up to 25 with a sign when bikers aren't present, or similar to school children, 20 miles an hour. I purposely drove 20 miles an hour down a long stretch of street, the most uncomfortable speed anyone could ever drive, and no one will do that. So we're purposely making people violate the law. So,
Member McCoy.
You know, I voted for those speed humps, but I also voted with them with the understanding that they would get to them when they could, and the money wasn't there the first year. They do the stop signs, and that would be part of the process as we funded that bike path. Now, if we're going to get into this and start going 50,000 award, okay, maybe I could be persuaded to support this, but I think this isn't what we're here to do. I think this picking one here, picking one there, and starting all of a sudden add to the budget when we've got issues already with what we're spending isn't the right thing. So that's in the plan. You've at least got a bike boulevard in your ward. I don't have a bike boulevard in my ward. You know, it's in a plan somewhere too. So I'm not going to support this. I think we need to just stop, move ahead, and quit fooling around with these $20,000 and $50,000 items.
Member Kaiser.
Thank you. I would just add on to this that if this passes, it's not going to replace any sidewalk repair. There is money in the budget for sidewalks. And last year, we didn't use all of our money for sidewalks. And as I understand it, we didn't use it the year before either. So there is money in the budget for sidewalk repair, and we've been reassured by Public Works that they're on it, and they're going to use up all of their budget this year to do that. So I don't see this as saying if we do this, then something else like sidewalks aren't going to get done. So this was essentially in response to, we want to do this greenway, and it's something new and great, and now we got to, you know, show the proof what we're going to do and actually do it. So it would be great to actually see that happen, besides just designating it. But, you know, let's actually put our money where our mouth is and do things. And I think $50,000 or more, less than that, is worth it for this project.
Member Milton.
I just want to make a statement. That's not what I heard Public Works just say, that it's like taking one from another. So.
Very good. Joyce wants to speak. Nope.
Oh, are you sure?
Yeah, I spoke.
Okay. All right. Any other discussion? I'm new at this, so I call for the vote. All those in favor of Member Kaiser's motion to spend $50,000 from Fund 155 for speed humps on the Maple Winter Greenway, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? No. Okay, show of hands on no.
Show of hands on no.
On no.
You need 10 yes or something like that.
The motion fails. Motion fails. Okay. Anything else?
Is this when we're supposed to do motions?
Yes.
Okay.
Motions.
Okay. I'm going to move we direct the city manager to prepare recommendations for city council consideration to create a revenue task force to explore new additional revenue sources and review potential fee adjustments to close the gap between cost of service and available revenues to support those services.
Second.
Thank you. And I'll just reiterate real briefly the issues that are at hand. We need to take a look at them. I've chaired this, I don't know, 15 so years ago, or maybe longer, the last time we had one of these. We've got the same problem we had then, we've got now. We've got increasing costs of PERS, increasing population, need to maintain infrastructure. We've got, we need to provide services to a growing population, and you can see all the issues that come with a growing population. State tax limitation have uncoupled property tax revenue from population growth, and we have made sustainable services the idea that we're going to be doing services that we can actually afford to do a council goal. We will bring this, I'd like to get the okay of the budget committee to go ahead, or at least your recommendation to council to take a look at it. I think it's something that is worth doing, although I will tell you we spent months looking at revenue, and the only revenue source we could arrive at was an increase in the hotel motel tax that went to a vote of the people, and the people voted yes. That's when we looked at everything. So it's a chance to kind of go back and take a look at the various kinds of revenue resources that are available to municipalities, which is actually a reasonably limited group. But we also have been increasingly relying on, we were sitting here tonight talking about, and we're going to pass a budget that'll include getting rid of a fee to rent DVDs, which is sort of, you know, we talk about getting rid of children's fines. We're looking for revenue sources. We're just not looking in any kind of comprehensive way, and it's time to do that. So I'd ask you to support it, send it along to the city council, and let them take it on. What it doesn't say is you're voting to increase revenues. You're just voting to have a look at revenues. It's just time to update the book. That's really what it is.
Member Nanki.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Madam Mayor. Hey, Madam Chair. Yes. I actually called Mr. Mayor Madam Mayor one meeting, and it was like, that went over well.
Last time you did that, though, right? Smart.
Yeah, and we've looked at revenue several times in the Finance Committee. The league has been looking at the revenue, as Deputy City Manager Duncan expressed earlier. Property, when they come on the tax rolls, don't even come on at their actual value. And we've been working at the legislative level for several years to try to fix that system as well. So hopefully that's one of the pieces that goes before that committee too, is to try to right-size that, because our property tax system is broken. And the equity amongst different jurisdictions throughout the state, both city jurisdictions and counties, is massively flawed based on subsequent actions, especially with timber revenue as well. Sorry, so loud.
Any other discussion or comments?
I would just add, wholeheartedly support a vote to pass that motion. I think that looking at both sides of the equation is an important part of the council's responsibility, and certainly the budget committee as well.
All right. Go ahead. Okay. I'd like to call for the vote on a motion made by Member Bennett to recommend, for the Budget Committee to recommend to Council to form a revenue committee, and it was seconded by Member Judy. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Motion passes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Any other items or topics we'd like to entertain this evening?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Member Tigan.
I guess I'd just be interested, perhaps Member Judy and I are with our absence tonight, the first year of our term on the Budget Committee, there's been a significant change to how this has gone on, and I'm just really interested in hearing from those who do have the experience, what you think. How is it, how has the change been from your experience in the past years to this year? I've found this a very enlightening experience, but not sure how to judge the change. And as we get ready to move into a different kind of budgeting system that we're going to learn about in the next couple of weeks, what people are thinking about how this has gone, the death of the wish list, if you will, and half-baked cakes and everything we've been told. So.
Member McCoy and then Anderson.
From my point of view, I think the staff's done an admirable job of listening to the council over the last several years and on some of our concerns and frustrations with the old process, and then with the strategic plan being implemented, taking that and sort of looking at the overall process and coming up with something that's much, I think, clearer for anyone who would just pick this book up and start going through it. You could get a real feel from the descriptions and the way it's presented on what we're doing and what we're about and why we're doing it. And before, it was just pages and pages and pages of line items, and you sort of had to be in the process a little bit to even get to that point. And frankly, it was not real clear, and it landed up with six weeks of meetings, long meetings, to get where we are right now in 3. And so I think kudos to the staff and the city manager for listening to us and for coming, I think, responding for something that takes the strategic plan into account and puts it at the head of the class where we wanted it to be, and comes up with a document that is really in line with what the council was thinking.
Member Anderson.
Before, each of the departments were sort of siloed. That's how we dealt with them. Here's Public Works, here's IT, here's police, here's fire, and now when you look at this in almost every one of the strategic areas, almost every one of the departments has some effect on that or is affected by that issue. So I'd agree with what Councilor McCoy said. I would also say I don't know if I would characterize it as the death of the wish list. I would more characterize it as driving the stake through the heart of the death wish. And you think we're spending some time on $24,000 here, $46,000 here, $50,000 there, as we did tonight. When we had the death wish, that was every single meeting. I always bring up the bocce ball court example. The death wish, yeah.
It was a wish list.
Yeah, the wish list. It was a death wish because it was the death of us, because we spent tons and tons of time on the $40,000 bocce ball court, those sort of things that we were looking at things from the wrong end of the telescope, and now we're not.
Member Nanke.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, similar. With only 3 meetings, a big difference I see is that it doesn't give new budget committee members a real opportunity to try to understand the processes we're moving through. And so I would encourage anyone to attend the pre-meetings at lunch and talk to staff as much as needed. And then I'd just like to say that with the newer process, it seems we have even less public attending our meetings than we did previously, but normally they were siloed as well. It was like pools, parks, bocce ball. So it'd be nice if we could look throughout the system on how we can try to engage the public more. I know several years ago, and it looks like we're moving towards that again as far as driving along the cliff. We took out several members and actually did public forums outside of the budget committee process, and I think that was very valuable as well, to get more public input on the budget overall and what their priorities were to kind of match with the council's strategic plan and goals as well.
Well, if I could comment as a Budget Committee member and a member of the community, my observation is that you're correct, we have fewer people showing up with just an item, but in my mind, by virtue of the public meetings that the council hosted over the last year, with the priorities, if anybody went and you were able to speak into the strategic plan, I think that's where the community came in and said, you know what?
True.
Public safety is important, or parks are important, and they themselves prioritized and actually gave marching orders, in my opinion, to the city council. And I think then the staff then took those goals and said, okay, so where does the money go then in order to meet these goals? And so I actually think it's been really wonderful.
Yeah.
I think there are more people who involve themselves in that process than have involved themselves in this process. Member Hoy, and then Member Bassett.
Thank you, Chair Moore Green. I would just like to underscore what you just said. I think that's completely right. And I think that, just to continue with the baked cake analogy, I think we just had more cooks in the kitchen, so to speak, earlier in the process, and that was the public, and that's a really good thing, because it was much more meaningful. It drove the priorities for the budget.
Absolutely.
That's why you don't see a lot of controversy here. You don't see a lot of wrangling like we have in years past, where these are the community priorities, and the staff has done an excellent job of preparing the budget to mirror those, and so I think it's a great process.
Member Bassett.
Good, thank you. As we look to priority-based budgeting and making some changes, I'm hopeful that next Tuesday, I believe is when it's discussed at noon,
Yes.
that we'll be able to hear about the option for decision packages and raising policy issues. In the state budgeting process, it changes what they call it, but policy option packages, decision packages. And so a specific example would be the condition of publicly owned infrastructure, i.e. streets. We haven't had a discussion about that this time around. During the 3 lunch hour meetings, there was some discussion on that. I feel that pavement condition is just really fallen off, and I would look forward for the budget-based discussions so that we could actually be told, if you want to clean up the condition of your pavement, a lot of governments have had an initiative to say maintenance first, let's take care of what we have. Give us a price on what it is to bring everything up to the level of maintenance that it should be, and then allow for a discussion of what are the trade-offs if we are going to take care of the infrastructure the way that we should. And I feel like we have missed that on this year's budgeting process, but I'm hopeful that it will be discussed next year.
Thank you. Member Kaiser.
Thanks. I've really enjoyed the priority-based budgeting. I think it's a more holistic way of looking at the city budget than in previous years where it was department by department. I have a feeling it's harder on department heads because they have to talk with one another and figure out things and how that fits into our service goals and come to every meeting. But speaking of meetings, it did cut down on our meetings. With that said, this year, I don't think we had a full budget committee meeting ever, because we always had somebody absent. So this meeting, we have 4 members absent. We have almost 25% of our committee absent. So I guess what I would say is we need to make a dedication to being here too, especially if we're going to have less meetings, because this is important stuff and it only happens during this time of year. So we really need a full committee here.
Member Nordijk.
I wholeheartedly agree. And a key for ensuring attendance is to give everyone as much advance notice of these meetings as possible. Vacation plans are hard to reschedule. I understand that. I had plans to be in Portland tonight and last Wednesday, And I fortunately was able to just say, sorry guys, I'm not able to attend those other events. But not everyone is as flexible. So the more advanced notice that I can receive, the more likely I can attend. And I'm sure that's to the benefit of all of our members. I also appreciate a lot of the additional noon hour presentations, although again, with more advanced notice, I would be able to attend more events of that nature, but without that notice, it's going to be hard for busy professionals to rearrange their schedules. So I definitely want to underscore that. And also, I am a big fan of this book. And this is a huge improvement over last year, just in terms of user friendliness. A lot of us on the committee come with a passion for public service, but perhaps not a financial wizardry background like myself. So to me, when I can see how these budgets and how these specific departments play into specific goals that were workshopped with the important input of the community, that helps me understand better why it's so important to spend so much money on this and so much money on that and so on and so forth. So I'm a big fan of this, and I'm sure it took a great deal of staff time, and I really commend the city staff for doing their utmost to answer all of our questions. And you never know what kind of pop quiz questions we're going to give you, right? So I very much appreciate that. I know how challenging that can be when all of a sudden a judge will ask me, counsel, what about such and such? Exhibit so-and-so. Will you please answer this little detailed question? So I know what it's like to have to do your homework and be prepared to give an answer on TV, no less. So thank you so much for all your hard work.
Member Lewis.
Yeah, I mostly just echo what everybody said. I really think the key to the new budget system will be how we utilize it during the next year. So maybe a year from now, it'll be better to see the results. As far as the wish list, I guess I see it a little bit differently. I think the public hearing will resurrect the wish list. In fact, I can bet on it. And it will be a discussion at the city council meetings about the budget. So I don't think the wish list is gone. I just think that it's been postponed.
Does that answer your question, Member Tigan?
Of course, thank you.
Great, wonderful, okay, thank you. Any other questions or issues, comments? No? Okay, then I'd like to move on then to item number 7C on the agenda, which is the approval of the FY 2019 City of Salem ad valorem property taxes, and we'll have a staff report on that.
Thank you, Member Moore Green. And actually, there is a report in your packet with the same agenda number. And the city's tax levy, and I'm just getting to mine, is the 5.8315 cents per $5.83. I'll just round it. $5.83 per thousand. That's the tax levy, the permanent tax levy. And then we also have the general obligation bond levy of $16,264,030. So with this motion, you would be approving both.
Do you have discussion? Member Anderson.
I'll make a motion. I move we approve the FY 2019 City of Salem ad valorem property tax rates.
Seconded by McCoy. Do we have any discussion? Yes, Member Haslett.
What was it last year?
They've been that way since they froze the tax rates.
Budget Officer Jacobs, you've always in the past given a little explanation of what this is,
Sure, and so there are two things at play here. The permanent tax rate, which Member Nanki is completely correct. It's been the $5.83 per thousand since our permanent tax rate was established. The other item is the tax levy, the general obligation bond tax levy, and is essentially an additional amount that is levied to pay for infrastructure projects like the police facility, the new police station, streets and bridges bond. The library is another example. So the actual general obligation bond levy is a separate thing from the permanent tax levy and is in addition to.
Member Anderson, did you have any, you had
I
your...
was just going to comment that this goes back to what Member Nanke was talking about. We were frozen at 5.8, and other cities were frozen at more than that. And so that's part of the inequities of the whole system the way it is now.
Member Nanke.
Thank you. And just to add on to that, yeah, another city who's about the same size as us is in the 7-some range. But that being said, just to go back to the general obligation bond levy, and it's been council's practice over many years to try to keep that as flat a line as we can, so you don't see a lot of variability in that. As one bond retires, we try to bring the next one on and ramp it to where that line stays fairly even, so people don't see significant changes in their tax burden from year to year.
Any other discussion? Okay. All those in favor of approving the City of Salem's ad valorem property taxes, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. Okay, motion passes. Okay. Moving to item number D, 7D on your agenda, the recommended FY 2019 City of Salem budget. Officer Jacobs.
Thank you. And this is the budget that was proposed to you by the city manager for the City of Salem, in addition to anything that was added as the result of the erratas that were approved last week, and also the errata that was approved this evening. So this will be the recommended budget as it's provided in the staff report, plus the amendment from this evening with the errata.
Any discussion? Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you. Okay, I have a motion from Member Nordijk with a second from Member McCoy. All those in favor of the City of Salem's FY 2019 budget as amended this evening, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. Okay, motion passes. Thank you. Okay, item number E on your 7E on your agenda, where we will now approve the fiscal year 2019 Salem Urban Renewal Agency ad valorem. Enunciation was not a high point for me. Property taxes. Budget Officer Jacobs,
Thank
please.
you, Chair Moore Green. And this is your switching your hats. You are now the Urban Renewal Agency Budget Committee. This is, as you know, a joint meeting of the two, the City of Salem and the Urban Renewal Agency. And so these are what you have before you in the staff report. That's item 7E, is the division of taxes and the special levy for, there is one special levy for the Riverfront Downtown Urban Renewal Agency, but the remainder is the division of taxes for each of the urban renewal agencies. We do this very separately. We treat these very discreetly and separately. So the total, though, for the city's urban renewal agencies for the tax levy is $14,049,780.
Discussion?
I move staff recommendation.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Any discussion? Is there any discussion or any questions? No? Okay. All right. I have a motion from Member McCoy and a second from Member Hoy. All those in favor of approving the Salem Urban Renewal Agency's property taxes, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. Okay. Motion passes. Thank you. All right. Moving to item number F, 7F on your agenda. Oh, did we do that? No. Oh, okay. No. Okay. sorry. This is the fiscal year 2019 Salem Urban Renewal Agency budget.
Thank you. And this, again, is the budget that was proposed to you by the city manager with the addition of one errata sheet, which was approved at the meeting last week, and that was for the convention center. So it's this, the proposed budget that appears here in the staff report, in addition to that errata sheet.
Questions, discussion? Member
I move
McCoy.
staff recommendation.
I move staff recommendation.
Thank you.
I raised my hand.
He spoke into the mic.
Is there any discussion? Okay. All those in favor of approving the Salem Urban Renewal Agency's fiscal year 2019 budget, please say aye. Aye. All those opposed, say no. Motion passes. Thank you. All right. Thank you, Budget Committee, all members. We now move to item number 8 on our agenda this evening, and it's public testimony for future budget issues. We've set aside time for public comment for items that are not on the agenda. Do we have anybody here this evening interested in? No public. Okay. All right. Seeing that there's no new business before the Budget Committee, I would like to personally thank each and every one of you, all the members, for your dedication. The weather has been lovely the last 3 Wednesday evenings. Yes. And we do appreciate that, and a very special thank you to all of the staff who is so terribly dedicated to the city, and year after year after year you come out and help us through this process. So thank you, and on that note, I'd like to adjourn this meeting.